Dr. Dediu, who is from the Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics in the Netherlands. His specialty is the relationship between genetics and language evolution.
Is it okay? Can you hear me? So thanks very much for having me here. I'm going to talk about language, and I have to rush it because it's a lot of information, it's a lot of stuff, and I have only 10 minutes. So, if you look at the present-day linguistic diversity, it looks amazingly patterned, and these patterns are absolutely fascinating. So, for example, there are more than 7,000 languages, depends on how you count them, spoken in more than 200 language families, and there are also language isolates. And the interesting thing is that, for example, if you look at this graph, most people speak just a few languages, while most languages are spoken by relatively few people. And if you look at the geographic spread of language families, you see also very interesting patterns with, some language families being all over the place, and most families being spoken in just a few places and having just a few languages. But interesting, and if you also look at the structural differences between languages, so for example, how many vowels, how many consonants languages have, some languages use tones, some don't, the order between the subject and verb, and so on and so on. There is huge diversity again amongst languages. But the point is that if you look at this diversity, the present-day linguistic diversity, and you try to see the multi-layered processes that created it, this is going to be extremely hard because you have process upon process upon process. And you need to peer through all of them to get to the interesting question of today, basically. So I start with basically the first layer, which I understand pretty well, and which dates to about 10,000 years at most. And that is the language families, the good old language families like Indo-European. And you have the tree of Indo-European here. You're going to see the Indo-Germanic branch, English, German, in the Romance branch, French, Italian, and so on and so on. So this is pretty well understood. We kind of think it was spoken about, Proto-Indo-European was spoken about 9,000 years ago, maybe somewhere in Anatolia. Again, it depends on whom you ask, but this is the data I believe. And the really interesting thing is that you have a really interesting parallel between the way languages change and evolutionary biology. So again, you have groups of related languages that are defined by shared innovations, in this case, some languages. And because of this parallel, people have started importing methods from evolutionary biology and applying them to language, like for example, Bayesian phylogenetics and phylogeography and so on and so on. And this is really cool because you not only can draw the structure of language families, you can date events like when the total language was spoken, where it was spoken, and how the spread happened geographically. And the interesting thing is that, some big language families like Indo-European, Bantu, and so on seem to have been driven by agricultural expansions, which are pretty recent. And the other important point to keep in mind is that these expansions basically raised a lot of pre-existing linguistic diversity. So already at this level, 10,000 years ago, you already have a modeling of all the information. It's really hard to peer through that and see what was there before. So, and again, we're talking about just 10,000 years, which is basically a sort of time horizon which is due to the speed of language change. And the problems that the standard comparative method in historical linguistics has to go beyond that. Again, it's 10,000 years ago, and it's already kind of hard to go. But of course, you have people that try to go beyond that, to more than 10, something like 15,000 years ago. And I'm pretty sure you all heard talking about macro language families like Stratic, like Eurasiatic, and so on and so on. I think that the point is that you have to go beyond the comparative method to say anything about that, and you have to use a combination of methods. Like you have to go phylogenetic, you have to do statistics, and so on and so on. And the signal, if there is any signal, it's extremely weak, extremely hard to tell about the noise, which means that all these proposals are extremely controversial. And I'm just going to talk about two, which are very recent. So one of them, a group led by Mike Patel in the UK, very recently used phylogenetic methods applied on the vocabulary, so very stable words, a few words. And basically they claim that they can reconstruct a Proto-Eurasian language family, which was spoken maybe 15,000 years ago, very controversial. And me and Steve Levison, we use structural data, so typological data, not the vocabulary. And basically what we show is that the way languages change in Eurasia seems to show that they change in the same way. So there might be some sort of relationship there. We don't know if it's genetic, like relatedness, or if it's a sort of really ancient contact. And interestingly, maybe for today, we find the same thing for the American language families, and very interesting that it's like, Western Eurasian language families clustered with the American ones. So that's my point to all the 15,000 years old signals. But again, it's just 15,000 years old and we're already extremely controversial. Which means that, when you're interested to the spread of modern humans, which is, 50,000 years plus, it becomes really amazingly controversial and interesting. So probably the best known proposals, like Quentin Atkinson a couple of years ago, who thought applying really, really cool methods. That was an amazing paper in Science. So he thought he can detect gradients of decreasing phonological complexity the further away you go from Africa. So basically, languages further away from Africa tend to have a simpler phonological system. And basically, this is part of what we're seeing in genetics and in the human phenotype. So he interpreted it as being a signal, an old signal of the modern human expansions from Africa. And he proposed that that happened through a linguistic serial founder effect. An extremely cool idea, extremely cool paper. Unfortunately, I think most of us nowadays agree that that's probably not the case. And there are many problems with the data, there are some problems with the methods, and so on and so on. There are many comments and papers that appear criticizing the results. But anyway, even if the result doesn't hold, the methods are amazing, and it was a really good move ahead for the field. So moving on, again, Steve and I proposed last year that basically modern speech and language are shared by us and the Neanderthals, but that's not the point today. The point is that maybe on top of the genetic and cultural contact that we thought happened, maybe there was also linguistic contact, and maybe we can detect it. So, as we came out of Africa as linguistic beings, and we met these other linguistic beings, what could have happened here? And there are several scenarios. So one of them is, basically their languages are dead, they just disappear, we just replace their languages, which is probably the case. I mean, I think it's the case, 99.9% that happened. Another possibility, logical possibility, is that we came out of Africa, we discovered these amazingly sounding languages, and we dropped ours. Let's get theirs. Probably not the case. Another logical possibility is that basically we built a new linguistic variant, people basically. Again, that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure it didn't because the social linguistic context was not right. But our proposal is that maybe there was borrowing. So even if their languages died out, maybe our languages kept some words and grammatical structures and so on from theirs. And that would mean that makes a pretty interesting prediction. That means that basically if you compare the languages of Africa to languages outside Africa, you might see some structural differences. Again, we're not talking about silver bullets, about single structural features that would differ between Africa and non-Africa. We talk about multivariate patterns, so really patterns of structural differences. So together with Sean Roberts, we started testing that, and we used the best linguistic databases we could use, having both typology, phonetics, phonology, and of course the lexicon. And we used quantitative methods that a lot of them. So basically we did clustering, we used methods from population genetics, phylogenetics, and so on and so on. And cutting a very long and developing story because we didn't finish the analysis. So what we find is that apparently there is a very weak signal setting apart the African languages from non-African languages. That's very weak. Now the question is, even if the signal is real, and indeed African languages are different from non-African languages. Now remember what I said, there are many layers. And there is no way of knowing which layer that is due. It could be due to the boundary expansions and the Indo-European expansions in Eurasia. We have no idea of knowing. But the point is, the take-home message, I think, from this is that we might have the methods of actually asking this sort of questions, but totally we don't yet have the data. So, does present-day linguistic diversity actually conserve any traces of old things, the expansions of modern humans out of Africa? Maybe. But the point is that there is going to be an extremely weak signal and extremely hard to tell it apart from the noise. And even if you do that, it's very hard to interpret. But the point is that we need much better language data. And we need to go fast because as you probably know, linguistic diversity is dying out extremely fast. So we need to collect data as quick as we can. And another question is, did our ancestors actually change languages with the archaes? Well, if you ask me, I say, yeah, maybe. But again, it's going to be extremely hard to prove it. And even if we can't prove it, it's going to be a massive field because we have to develop methods to collect data to do it. And can we hope to go as far back as 50,000 years plus to see that? I think yes, but we need to go into new methods for linguistics. So going statistical, going multivariate, and basically try to see the patterns of diversity that tell something. But this raises a very interesting problem. So then you have a balance between being extremely conservative and saying, I want to be convinced. I'm extremely hard to be convinced by the patterns I see in the data. Or you can go the other way and be extremely liberal. I'm like, oh, there are patterns everywhere. So let's build some just stories. And it's really hard to